Ago, and I said, I don't know if I have that much to say, but then the next day all these things came to my mind, so now I have lots to say here. I'm quite used to, of course, standing in front of a group of students. I'm a first grade teacher at this time, so I'll probably just picture you as all first grade, and everything will be fine. I'm also very used to teaching my peers, and I've stood up and taught many groups of teachers. But I haven't given that many speeches, so bear with me. And I also apologize, I have gum in my mouth, but I have this dry mouth condition, so I kind of have to keep something in there to keep it moist. And if I take a drink at all during the time, hopefully I won't get raked over the coals like poor Marco Rubio did. Well, anyway. I thought about what to say, and what came to me was, in the 30 plus years that I've been a teacher, I've learned a lot about human nature. I've learned about what motivates people and what motivates and how they tick, kind of. And I guess I'd like to share that in relation to politics. So everybody knows what the 3 R's of education are, right? We've got reading, writing, and arithmetic. Good job. Those are the foundational skills for education. If you weaken those skills, education crumbles, basically. You have to have those 3. So I've thought of, pardon?
Speak a little louder.
Okay, I'll try. I have, in my mind, thought of the 3 R's for America. And I could also call that the 3 R's for our state of Minnesota as well. And in each of these R's, I believe, is a foundation piece for our state and for our country that we have to have a solid country. So one of the things I've always focused on in my classroom is teaching kids how to work together well and how to get along. And a number of years ago, I had 2 precious young men named Jameson and Miguel, both first graders. Now, Jameson and Miguel loved to play with the Lincoln Logs. And every day I'd give a short amount of time where they can play and learn how to get along, all my students. And they would always go to the Lincoln Logs. And their favorite part of that was the little figurines that were in there, these little plastic figurines. And they, the red one, which they called the red guy, was their favorite. Now there's a red, a blue, and a black guy. For some reason, the red guy was the favorite one. And they always argued over that. So I like to teach my students, instead of telling them, give them his turn or whatever, I like to teach them ways to work that out together. So I went through some different ideas. I said, you can do rock, paper, scissors. I don't know if you're all familiar with that. You can flip a coin. You can take turns each day. And they chose flip a coin. And every day they'd come to me and they'd plop that red guy on my desk, and they would look to me to flip the coin. So this went on for quite some time. And then one day, they came up with a little different slant to the issue. Miguel comes up and he puts the red guy on my desk and he says, I want the red guy. And Jameson comes up and he plops the blue guy on my desk and he says, I want the blue guy. And then they waited for me to flip the coin. And you can imagine, I kind of chuckled over that, and I had to explain to them, no, you don't really need to flip the coin for this one. But isn't that just like humans, that sometimes we get so caught up in the process that we forget the goal? And in government, it's the same way. We get so caught up in politics that we forget the goal. And the goal, in my mind, is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's our goal as a government. So, my first R for our state of Minnesota and for America is respect. I think respect is a key element. We need to respect people. We need to respect that there's other viewpoints that aren't the same as my own. The word tolerance is touted very often, but I don't think a lot of people nowadays know what the real definition of tolerance is. We need a balance of many different viewpoints. And that's what makes our state strong. If you shut down the ability to speak freely, you shut down liberty, and that weakens our whole foundation. I'd say that the main culprit that shuts down free speech right now is called political correctness. And that shuts down the ability to respect different viewpoints because it shuts the whole conversation down. Political correctness and freedom of speech can't exist together in the same social realm. Political correctness takes regular social mores that would keep control of offensive speech and brings it to an extreme. It attempts to remove all offense by shutting down free speech and controlling what people say, and sometimes trying to control what people think. And very often it likes to protect the extreme elements of society instead of the base. Every time political correctness proclaims its mantra of freedom from offense, it squelches free speech. Freedom of speech and freedom of offense are polar opposites. You can't have one. It's either one or the other. So sometimes we have to realize that in America, we have the freedom that sometimes we're going to be offended. I believe political correctness is one of the most dangerous things of our time, because two fundamental principles of our America that it was founded on is freedom of speech and freedom of thought. Political correctness shuts that down and puts a muzzle on people. If that's not reined in, it's going to shut the door on freedom of speech in America. It's not just going to shut it, it's going to lock it. Lack of respect, that first R, is also very evident in all the name-calling that seems to happen in our political arena. People who don't have very good arguments themselves go to attack the person instead. That's when we start hearing words like racist or homophobe. When you do that, instead of having rational, open conversations about debatable issues, you just shut the people down by calling them names. Tolerance is not synonymous with acceptance. It's okay to disagree. It's crazy how much time we spend in our society trying not to offend people. You know, I better say happy holidays instead of Merry Christmas. Or I better not hang that cross on my wall because I might offend somebody. Instead of spending so much time figuring out how not to offend people, maybe we need to spend a lot of time on how to teach people that they need. Oh, I'll try to talk louder, okay. Instead of spending so much time trying not to offend people, maybe we need to use that time to teach people how not to be offended when they hear something that they disagree with. The book of Isaiah, in the book of Isaiah, God says, "Come, let us reason together." I think that's a great saying. We need a lot of different opinions to make our environment rich, and we need to learn how to hold meaningful and honest discussions without the fear of offending people. The second R that I have for America is responsibility. And this is a big one, and it covers a lot of areas, and it's personal responsibility and self-reliance. The person who has the most to do with what happens to you in life is you. That came from Dr. Ben Carson, whom I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. Great speaker. I really respect that man. We have too many victims in our society. We have victims of poverty, and so we exponentially grow a welfare state and a welfare nation. We have victims of race, and so we unknowingly nourish racism. We have an excuse for everything. It's always someone else's fault. It's the way I grew up. My parents beat me. I don't have enough money. There's even the laughable ones, like the lady who went through the drive-up window at McDonald's to get a cup of coffee, stuck it between her legs as she drove on, and it spilled and burned her. It wasn't her fault. It was McDonald's fault for having too hot of coffee. That one sticks in my mind a lot. Every time we say to ourselves it isn't fair, or we hear someone else who says that to us, it essentially removes a big component of life, and that's personal responsibility. Before I go any further, I want to emphasize something. I absolutely recognize that we have people in our country, in our state, who generally have difficult lives. Poverty can be debilitating. There's people of color that have a difficult time just because of the color of their skin. I recognize that, and I have compassion on those people. However, I believe that a person's first step in freeing themselves from a difficult situation is encapsulated in what Ben Carson said, and I'll say it again. The person who has the most to do with what happens to you in life is you. Personal responsibility affects greatly our government, our area of government assistance, welfare, food stamps, unemployment insurance, and so on. I'm not going to say a lot of specifics on that right now because I haven't really studied up on it enough, and I would probably put my foot in my mouth if I said specifics, so I won't. But I do know that as a state and as a nation, we have a big problem. And it's out of control, and it's going to sink us if we don't get control of it. I won't even try to quote the statistics of how many people are on public assistance in our state or in our country, because I think it changes probably every day. I do know that people flock to Minnesota just for our welfare benefits. They should flock here because we're a good state, not because of that. One thing I do feel comfortable about talking about specifics, though, is human nature. And as a teacher, I've had, as I mentioned before, a lot of time to observe that up close for many years. I've observed, again, what makes people tick and what motivates them. When it comes down to it, kids and adults are not very different in that area. I used to shake my head when the so-called gurus would come into the schools, the behavior gurus, and they would tell us, they would say, if you have your classroom set up perfectly, you will have no discipline problems, and you will have great motivation, no motivation problems. I would just laugh, because that's not true. Those gurus come from a philosophy that says human nature is innately good. And personally, I don't agree with that. A very wise man once said, there is no one who is good, none except God. And that was 2,000 some years ago, and that was Jesus who said that. Kids are going to be kids. They're going to misbehave. They're going to make mistakes, no matter how well I have my classroom set up. And the same goes for us adults. We can have the best environment, but things aren't going to go well sometimes. Unfortunately, we as humans can tend towards something, and that would be greed and selfishness and laziness. And unless the positive qualities in us are nurtured, that's what we're going to tend towards. That's human nature. In any program, whether it's in a school or in society, we need to have both positive consequences and negative consequences. It's necessary because of our human nature. We do genuinely have needy people. There's disabled people that can't take care of themselves, and as a community, we need to get around those people and take care of them. I also believe in giving help to people who aren't disabled but have fallen on hard times. There's many people having difficulties, and it's not because they're greedy or lazy, it's just because things happen. We need to help those people too. But it's for a time. There's a lot of people, though, that are using the system because that's what they've been taught to do. And because human nature can tend to move toward greed and selfishness and laziness, they will continue to do that unless there's some kind of intervention. We have to build in safeguards to our aid programs so that that doesn't happen. The main idea is to give people a hand up, not a handout. In our government's well-intentioned bid for compassion, we have in many cases crippled the very people that we've desired to help. Compassion that goes too far turns destructive to its beneficiary. Think of this. If you have a child and you carry that child his whole childhood, never let him walk, when it's time to let him go out of the house and live on his own, what's going to happen? He's not going to be able to walk. That's because our bones were designed to strengthen with pressure. Too much pressure and they'll break. Too little pressure and they won't adequately support. That's what happens when we continually help people without teaching them how to do it on their own. Every time our government creates dependency, it takes away freedom. We need to help people see that. Dependent people lose freedom. They lose the freedom to choose what they want to buy. They lose the freedom to live where they want to live. They lose the freedom to dream about who they want to be. We need to help people, but it needs to be done wisely and with common sense so that we don't create perpetual dependency where people lose their freedom. Personal responsibility also impacts education greatly. I've seen that as a teacher for my 30 plus years. Education is a critical importance in our country. I would say one of the main important things because it gives people the power to lift themselves up out of poverty. It's also necessary in our whole government system to have an educated populace because if we don't, people are too easily led this way and that way, and we end up with a lot of problems in our government. James Madison, who is one of our founding fathers and the fourth president, said this: "Knowledge will forever govern ignorance, and a people who mean to be their own governors must arm themselves with the power which knowledge gives." Education has the power to transform people. Think back to the slavery era. What did those powerful men in the South not want the slaves to get? They didn't want them to have an education. Why is that? Because they knew how empowering education can be. There's no doubt that we have a problem with our education system in this country. We've fallen behind in other countries, and our students are underperforming. Across America, we've had lots of educational reforms, and I've been through many of them, and they come and they go, and they're not working. In most cases, they might work a little bit. Legislators and the public push for teacher accountability. I agree with that. I think that's important because the teacher is probably the number one key to educating children successfully. However, we can set up the best classroom possible and use our best interventions and our best teaching skills, and we're still not going to reach the full potential among our students. And the reason is because there's two other key partners to that. There's the students and the parents, and we have to have a three-pronged approach to education. Personal responsibility, accountability needs to be threefold: the teacher, the student, and the parent. And unless you have all those people accountable and working in it, it's not going to work. The loss of personal responsibility in America has impacted education greatly. Many students and parents for many, many reasons, have disengaged from education in the component that really counts, and that's hard work. It takes hard work to be educated. In our society, and you've all seen it all on commercials and everything, we want instant results with a minimum of effort. Look at all the weight loss commercials you see. You know, you can lose weight in 5 minutes, 20 pounds, whatever. You know, that's what we want. I often joke about making a cartoon, you know, those little drawings you see in the newspaper. And I would have a student sitting in, just kind of sprawled out in a chair, watching TV or maybe playing around with a computer. And the teacher would be next to that student with one of those IV poles with a bag, the IV hanging off of it, plugging the IV into the student's arm. And that bag would say education. That's kind of what we're expecting today. And it doesn't work that way because there's no such thing as passive education. Abigail Adams, who was the wife to our second president, John Adams, wrote to their 10-year-old son, and she said this: "Learning is not obtained by chance, but must be sought for with ardor." It's hard work, that's an old word. She knew the value of hard work, and she was trying to instill that in her son. We need to regain this quality and help instill that into our people today. As teachers, we need to inspire our students and help them to work hard and teach them that it's hard work that gets them results. At a district level, we need to reward our students for their hard work and their progress and their growth. Think of that again, not just for the results, but for their... I mentioned that with government aid, we need rewards and consequences type of thing, but we also need in education the same thing. Speaking to the positive points, we need to reward and recognize students. Our society right now does not, we say we hold education as important, but we don't. What we hold important, and you see it in the commercials and on TV shows and everything, would be sports and Hollywood. I would be willing to bet there's a lot more money spent by colleges on scholarships for sports than for education, for academic scholarships. We need to recognize academic excellence and bring it to the forefront. It needs to be nurtured and treated like a sport. It needs to be celebrated in the news. Schools need to celebrate academic winners as much as they do sports winners. And I'm not against sports. That's great for students, and it teaches kids a lot. But we need to hold academics just as important. We need to recognize growth. There's a lot of students that are so far behind that they can't reach that point where they're going to get, you know, a good grade or whatever. And no wonder they give up. If any of us were like that, we would give up if we're that far behind. So what we need to do is not only reward that top grade, but reward the progress. If we do, we'll see some changes. Fiscal responsibility is another type of responsibility for our state and for our government. We have big problems at the local, state, and national levels. I mean, we heard it on the news just recently with Detroit going bankrupt, and there's states that are close to being bankrupt. It's a big problem. What is our national debt now? 16.5 trillion something? How can we even comprehend that? I'm going to take again from what Dr. Ben Carson said and how he explained it. He said that to imagine how big that number 16 trillion is, start counting right now and you count up to 16 trillion. Do you know how long that will take you?
215 years.
Ooh, a lot more.
Was that right?
I don't know how he figured this out. One number per second, I guess, is how he figured it out. 507,000 years. That is 500,000 years to count that far. I'd say we have a big problem. I love history, and so I've read a lot about our different founding fathers and our presidents, and this is what Thomas Jefferson said. He said, "We shall all consider ourselves unauthorized to saddle posterity," that's our children and our children's children, "we're unauthorized to saddle our children with our debts, and we're morally bound to pay them ourselves." And he went on to say that it has to happen within that generation. We're far from that right now. Fiscal responsibility belongs at the state level too, and it includes debt, but it also includes, like Mylon was saying, being responsible to our businesses. We need a state that makes it conducive for businesses to grow and be nourished and develop. Business livelihood is state livelihood. That's what it is. It's fiscal responsibility. My dad is a retired Twin Cities car dealer. He and his partner built a highly successful dealership starting when I was a baby. So I had a ringside seat, as you might say, to what it's like to own a business. And it's not easy. I was able to see the joys of it, and I was able to see the struggles of it. My dad not only had the weight of his own personal finances, whether he lost it or gained more, but also the livelihood of all of his employees in his hands. That was often very stressful. Owning a business isn't an easy job. It takes a lot of risks, and I know many of you here know that, right? We cannot regulate business. We have to have obviously some reasonable regulations, but we can't overregulate, and we can't tax them out of productivity. And the reason is if you continually punish businesses, especially small businesses, which are, what do they say, that's 80% of our private sector jobs today. If you do that, you extinguish the desire to work hard and to take risks. People won't do it. Responsibility, again, the last part of responsibility that I see is the responsibility to speak out and be involved. And now I'm preaching to the choir because you're all here, and that's great. Our government is us, right? We, the people. And we're a government by the people and for the people. We can't forget that. It's too easy to get complacent. Another quote that I love from Thomas Jefferson is this, and they had this issue way back then too. This isn't a new thing. He said, "Every government degenerates when trusted to the rulers of the people alone. The people themselves, therefore, are the only safe depositories." That's us. We're the safe depositories. We're we, the people. We need to be informed, and we need to be involved when it comes to government. We need to vote responsibly, and we need to speak out. My great-grandfather, actually great times 5, fought in the Revolutionary War. His name was Walter Avery Buddington. And he fought to give his children the things that we have now and to give us the things that we have now. He went through getting captured, getting put on a British prisoner of war ship, was there for over a year in horrendous situations, was eventually released and had to walk back home. That was in New York. He had to walk back home to Connecticut, where he continued to fight the war for liberty. And one of the things he fought for was free speech, the ability to speak out. We can't. not do that. We have to. It was fought for. It's part of our American nation. So silence can be interpreted often as agreement, right? So it's our job as citizens to speak out and get involved. If we don't, we cease being we the people, and we turn from a government following the will of the people to the people following the will of the government. And there's a big difference in that. I think it's time for we the people to start governing again. The third and last R, and I'll keep this one short, I promise, I'm almost done. The first two R's that I spoke of, respect and responsibility, are qualities of character. And the third R that I call revival is that we need a revival of character in this country. Character is the foundation that makes a nation weak or strong. And history showed that over and over many times. We need the revival of basic character qualities that this country was founded on, like hard work, responsibility, perseverance, self-reliance, and respect. I'm sure you're all familiar with the symbols of our American flag, right? I don't know where it went, but you've got the stripes. 13 stripes are symbolic for our 13 original colonies. The stars, of course, everybody knows, are the 50 stars for the 50 states. But did you know that the colors are symbolizing something too? I didn't know that until recently when I read it. But red, the color red, stands for hardness and valor, bravery. The color white, purity and innocence. The color blue, perseverance, vigilance, and justice. Those qualities were important to our founding fathers, and they're still important today. We need to instill in people again that quality of independence and self-reliance, while not forgetting that we still need to encourage care and compassion to take care of people who can't take care of themselves. Where do we go to answers for the problems? Similar to what Mylan said. We go to we the people. How to grow business? Who do you go to? You go to successful business leaders for that. You talk to people like my dad and other people who have had successful businesses. For answers on how to solve our society's addiction to government dependence, I'd say the best people to go there are to successful parents who have raised kids and instilled the qualities in those kids that when they became adults, they were successful, independent adults. A lot of it's just plain common sense. The United States, we in the United States, it means united people. Not a people who necessarily think the same and do the same things. That'd be boring. But we're united under one cause. And that's what I said at the beginning. Liberty, justice, and the pursuit of happiness. It's time our government quit focusing on things that divide, like class warfare or pitting race against race, and start focusing on common things in all of us that make this country great. We don't need a new government. We don't need to transform the government. Our old government worked quite well. Our forefathers birthed a limited government, and they provided an atmosphere that encouraged innovation, hard work, responsibility, and respect. The result is the greatest nation on earth. And I'd say we need to continue that. So thanks for letting me talk.